Whether you've been gaming all your life or just started last month, there's something special about this medium that you can't get from movies, books, or music. There's always been this charm about it that drew you in to whatever world was handcrafted by creative people who could rival the greatest minds of Hollywood. Whether it was the simple Mario-style platforming, the high-speed racing of Need for Speed, the deep lore of Dark Souls, or the emotional stories of Final Fantasy, games have always given us a way out. To take a small break from reality, with some of us needing it much more than others. And what was seen as a waste of time had exploded into a respectable and profitable career path that so many reach out for, but so few can ever grasp. In other words, the little brother of modern media eats at the adult's table, while his older contemporaries try not to starve off of their own irrelevance. But as much as I respect gaming as a whole and the communities that run deep, it's hard to defend what it's become in the last decade. In this age of financial uncertainty and corporate greed, gaming no longer feels like a waste of time, but feels more like a waste of money. Gone are the days of creative innovation and fun gameplay where you could really feel the passion behind these projects. But now, it seems that profit takes priority on the gaming pedestal, and companies are very blatant with this through microtransactions, overpriced games that require day one patches, cut content held behind DLC paywalls, and so much more. And the less we say about Nintendo, the better. There's a disturbingly deep disconnection that we often get from these game companies. Something I didn't feel growing up, and I had to pay for my games through allowances or trading at GameStop. I say all this because gaming has become such an expensive hobby, and unless you're a content creator or esports player, it's hard to truly enjoy gaming for what it is in its purest form. And that's taking a break from all the overwhelming obstacles of the real world, whether it was after a tough time at school or a rough day at work. This video was originally about Dragon Age Veilguard and its modern mediocrity, but it was merely a manifestation of the gaming industry as a whole. The game itself wasn't a failure, but took on the role to show us the pathetic state we're in, where developers and gamers are suffering under the collapsing weight of corporate greed. I was pretty excited for Veilguard when it was making its rounds, only because it was developed by BioWare, the same team behind the Mass Effect trilogy. And despite my feelings towards Mass Effect Andromeda, I knew they had learned their lesson from that awful game. At least that's what I told myself. Even with the lackluster reviews from people, I still have faith in BioWare. But when IGN gave it a 9 out of 10, I knew something was wrong, because who takes IGN reviews seriously anymore? And when Veilguard was put on PlayStation Plus, a $70 AAA game mind you, given away for free 5 months after release, I had to try for myself. And it was one of the most average games I've played in the last few years. I understood why IGN backtracked going from their 9 out of 10 to a stagnant 7. With games like Stellar Blade, Black Myth Wukong, Shadow of the Erdtree, Shadow Generations, among many others, it's hard to appreciate Veilguard for what it is. A boring RPG that starts off with high intensity, but slowly transitions into bittersweet boredom for the majority of the game, only to revitalize your engagement by the end of it. This game is 40 hours long, and the only part I enjoyed was at the beginning and the end. My issue wasn't the story, nor Tosh's self-inserted characterization of coming out the closet. It was the overly repetitive gameplay and lack of control I had in the story. This is the same studio who gave us Mass Effect, Dragon Age Origins, its sequel, and Inquisition. Games with actual choices and consequences, decisions you had to live with whether you liked it or not. But with Veilguard, it felt like the game was holding my hand as if I was incapable of making big boy choices, while at the same time giving me a false sense of independence through its dialogue tree. Whether I wanted to come off as smart, stern, or sarcastic, my character always came off as overly supportive for everyone. Sometimes you want to be an asshole, but you can't when the game forces you to be everyone's friend. And with every cutscene, the dialogue tree felt more and more useless. What happened when your choices had some real weight to them? In the Witcher series, the choices you made and the things you did or didn't do constantly affected the story. Enemies becoming allies, friends living or dying based on what you did, the endings catching you off guard because you can't remember what you did that caused it. Obviously, every game isn't designed like that, but if it's advertised as such, there needs to be a deep level of creativity that supports such a claim. And despite its less than stellar graphics and okay combat, there's a clear reason why the Witcher series is still compared to modern AAA titles, and that was CD Projekt Red's approach to storytelling and constantly improving their gameplay, pushing past their boundaries. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was commendable. There hasn't been a new Witcher game in 10 years, but it's still in the back of people's minds rent-free. I don't get that sense of substance from Veilguard. Instead, it feels shallow, as if it's trying to play it safe throughout the entire 40-hour journey. And that perfectly represents what the gaming industry has become, at least with AAA companies. With profit being the main driving force, they often produce what they think gamers want instead of actively listening to their fan base. It's a lot like asking your parents for something back when you were a kid, and on your birthday or Christmas, they get you something completely different. I asked for an Xbox 360, but you get me a GameCube. How? And through their stubbornness or stupidity, it creates a never-ending cycle of remakes, remasters, and regurgitation of titles that stagnate the natural flow of evolution and imagination, to the point that the only factor these companies are concerned with is graphical fidelity, and we've long hit that ceiling years ago. Granted, I don't hate remakes or remasters. I love playing RE2 and RE4 Remake, as well as Final Fantasy VII Remake and its sequel Rebirth. It gives people the chance to enjoy a popular game they didn't have access to at the time of its original release. Of course, the more cynical reason is for companies to take advantage of people's nostalgia while attracting new players to their franchise, catching two fish with one worm, so to speak. But the obsessively over-reliance of this marketing technique is indicative of where the gaming industry is heading. You remember when Sony revealed the PlayStation 5 Pro with a piss-poor presentation, claiming it to be such a powerful product, but instead looked pitiful on its pedestal, lacking passion and personality? And the reveal could not have been any more disconnected than when they used Spider-Man and The Last of Us Part 2 to show next-gen graphics that you wouldn't even notice until they were side by side with what we have now. There's a reason that video has over 200,000 dislikes. And that ties into The Last of Us releasing a complete edition. The Last of Us came out in 2013 to critical acclaim, and then a remaster in 2014. Part 2 in 2020, followed by The Last of Us Remake in 2022, a remaster of Part 2 in 2024, and now a complete edition in 2025 that wraps all of that in one little box. This game started on the PS3 and is still being re-released on the PlayStation 5. You're going to be playing this with your grandkids on the PlayStation 7 Deluxe Pro with The Last of Us Last Chapter Prologue Final Mix Edition. I haven't seen that many re-releases for the same game since the early days of Street Fighter. Sony has been shoving this game in our faces for 10 years. You know what else Sony was doing during that time? Ignoring a highly requested remake or remaster of Bloodborne, while at the same time releasing games like this. The blatant disconnect from these companies is nothing more than a deeply disturbing depiction of how they disregard the gaming communities they help create, and yet they have the nerve to be smeckledorfed when the games don't sell as well as they wanted. But remakes and remasters may as well be an allegory for modern gaming, because new games still feel like old games. And what I mean is that, how many times have you played one game and it feels like a carbon copy of another, despite them being made from two separate developers? Take Dark Souls for example. One of the most influential IPs in our lifetime created a formula that many developers failed to replicate nearly 20 years after its inception. Games like Surge, Lords of the Fallen, Cold Vein, Mortal Shell, and Hellpoint, among others, were criticized for either repetitive gameplay, confusing storylines, or clunky mechanics. I'm not saying these games are terrible, but you can tell they rely too heavily on one component of the Dark Souls formula, without considering everything else that goes with it. The lore, the level design, the characters, the art style. There's a reason Lies of P is called Bloodborne 2, and that's because they understood what makes a great Souls game, not just in its combat, but also in its storytelling and the world they create around it. You can feel the inspiration from Bloodborne, while making something fresh with one of the most well-known stories that's been retold for over 100 years. Of course, Lies of P has its flaws, but the concept alone is brilliant, a level of creativity you don't see as much. Even FromSoft understands the sinister stagnation of playing it safe, which is why we have games like Armored Core and Sekiro that shake things up a bit. At the end of the day, FromSoft is a business that still has to pay the bills, but over the years have established itself as a well-meaning studio that just wants people to have fun playing their games, building a community instead of a soulless corporation. So even when they release IPs that are different from their main bread and butter, people still go out and buy them because they want to support FromSoft as they have earned that respectable reputation. This is especially true when AAA projects are becoming a stigma almost as bad as early 2000s licensed games. With that being said, I'm not sure how well FromSoft's latest game Dustbloods will do, considering it's a Switch 2 exclusive, and we all know the catastrophic controversy with Nintendo right now. Originally, I wasn't going to talk about them in this video because everyone is already, making it redundant on my end. But being on the topic, I have to talk about this, and it's not about their latest console. It's no secret that Nintendo is a huge company, as they have been breaking selling records for like the last 30 years. Even games like Princess Peach Showtime and Zelda Echoes of Wisdom outpaced and outsold many of their competitors, despite not being talked about that much after their release. And though I can't deny their success, it feels like Nintendo has been rather complacent these last few years, specifically with their Pokemon games. Look, I'm not the biggest Pokemon fan, but I grew up watching the anime and playing the games. I even cried a little bit when Ash became world champion a couple years back. But I fell off after Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Let's Go Pikachu. Mainly because I was burnt out with the same formula of kidnapping furry animals and forcing them to fight criminals and world champions. Those days are long gone. But after hanging up the jersey, apparently I didn't miss much because the series continued its lack of innovation with its repetitive gameplay and poor storytelling, along with lackluster graphics and performance issues. And at the time, that was the standard, with gamers just accepting that. But in 2024, here comes Palworld, which is a clear ripoff of Pokemon. But players didn't care because the game shook things up in the monster-catching genre that Nintendo dominated for nearly 30 years. After playing it myself, I didn't really care for it all that much. Perhaps I didn't find the right path for me. But that's what I mean by being creative, taking old elements and making something new through your own artistic interpretation. No one is asking these developers to make something 100% original. It's damn near impossible nowadays. Why do you think smartphones and flat screen TVs haven't changed much in their designs? But no one complains about it because they have their own features that set them apart. Say what you want about Sega, but at least they're not afraid to experiment. Some of them were a masterpiece while others were a piece of trash, but they still try. Can't say that for other well-known companies. Back then, games were made through creativity, innovation, and experimentation. Sometimes they were a huge success, other times they faded into history, but developers saw what worked and what didn't. Sadly nowadays, they keep reusing the same formula over and over and over again, often leading to flat gameplay that feels extremely stale. But I can't blame these greedy companies completely. We as gamers have to take some responsibility for why the gaming industry is the way it is. We fail to hold these AAA developers to a higher standard, never demanding accountability from them when they release these soulless cash grabs at ridiculous prices. We complain and make fun about it, but go and buy it anyway. And then lie to ourselves about saying, oh, it wasn't that bad, it could have been worse. What kind of logic is that? That's why beloved franchises like Pokemon, Assassin's Creed, and Dragon Age are suffering now. And by suffering, I don't mean they don't sell well, but rather in their presentation and execution. If we as consumers don't expect more from them, why should they? You can see the collective change when communities band together and decide when enough is enough. The success of Palworld led to Nintendo wanting to shut down the indie game for the stupidest reasons. The empty promises, microtransactions, and changes in gameplay led Overwatch 2 losing half of its players to Marvel Rivals, of which is a pretty good game from what I've heard, that listens to its community. Hell, the success of Ghost of Tsushima is what led to Ubisoft making Assassin's Creed Shadows, a game set in Japan that fans have been begging for years. And as you can see, the lack of competition leads to complacency, with the only thing that they understand is money. So if we want the quality of AAA games to justify the high price tags, we need to hit them where it hurts the most, in their pockets, by not buying their products, support more indie developers, and having enough respect for ourselves to demand better from the companies we elevated in the first place. But this is a topic that's been discussed a countless number of times, and my voice is just another drop in the bucket. Because if Nintendo fans are anything to go by, there are always going to be people to justify why things are the way they are. But that's a separate video for someone else to do. Again, this was supposed to be about Dragon Age Veilguard, but all it did was show me just how shallow the video game industry had become. With that being said, this isn't a dig to anyone who enjoyed the game. After all, it did sell over 1 million copies, so there are players who like the game. But this is coming from my own experience in my years as a gamer. But whether you agree or disagree, I would love to hear your thoughts on the matter. My opinion is no better than yours. I'm always down to listen to new perspectives because it helps me see things differently. Perhaps I overlooked some things, maybe I didn't give enough credit to certain factors, or maybe I'm just ignorant to things I don't consider or understand. But as always, thank you so much for watching, and please, feel free to like, subscribe, and join the conversation. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care.